You step one more inch onto my grass, and I'll have you locked up for trespassing. That was the scream that shattered my Sunday morning peace as Karen marched across her perfectly edged lawn in leopard print slippers and a silk robe, armed with a phone in one hand and a trembling cup of coffee in the other. I froze mid-snip, hedge trimmers dangling from one hand, confused by the sudden hurricane of entitlement blowing my way. I wasn't on her lawn. In fact, I was trimming a bush that had stood in the exact same spot on the border of my property since before she even bought that house. But to Karen, facts didn't matter. All that mattered was control, and today, apparently, I was her target. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. I'd planned to clean up the edge of my property, drink some lemonade, maybe throw a steak on the grill later. Instead, I found myself standing face to face with a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days, but had somehow summoned enough energy to organize a neighborhood war tribunal over a misplaced blade of grass. She kept tapping her phone screen, probably trying to get through to the HOA's emergency line. Her finger was trembling with rage. Her bathrobe belt flapped in the wind like she was about to duel me at dawn. The worst part? I was still holding the trimmers like some kind of clueless suburban pirate. I tried reasoning with her. I calmly explained that I was on my property, that the bush had been here long before her house even existed, and that the property line ran just a few feet from her driveway. She wasn't hearing any of it. Instead, she pulled a yellowed paper out of her pocket that she called her HOA covenant. She waved it like it was a royal decree and pointed to a highlighted section. Right here, it says I have landscaping authority on all visible edges of the street-facing portion of adjacent lots. I didn't even know what that meant, and I'm pretty sure she didn't either. But she said it with the confidence of someone who thinks yelling louder makes you more right. Then came the golf cart, rolling down the street with a flashing orange light and a slow beep-beep like it was some kind of emergency vehicle. Driving it was Frank, the HOA president, and conveniently, Karen's cousin. He pulled up like he was about to oversee a hostage negotiation and stepped out holding a clipboard that had seen way too many fines and not enough real paperwork. Karen started clapping like a child at a puppet show. There. That's him. That's the trespasser, she shrieked, pointing at me. Frank adjusted his sunglasses, looked at my hedge trimmers, and nodded like he'd just solved a crime. Frank told me I was in clear violation of community boundary expectations, and that I'd be receiving a formal letter of censure. I asked him if he could show me exactly where the property line was. He looked at Karen. She looked at him. Then he pointed vaguely at the bush and said, "It's somewhere right here. But you should know, if you don't comply, the HOA has the right to escalate this." That's when I knew this was going to be more than just a Sunday argument. This was war. And I don't lose wars. Before I could respond, a black and white sheriff's cruiser rolled up. Apparently, Karen had actually called the real cops on me. The deputy got out, already rubbing his temples, as if he knew what kind of nonsense he was walking into. He asked what the issue was. Karen launched into a tirade about how I was aggressively trimming vegetation and violating visual harmony with rogue shrubbery. Yes, those were her actual words. The deputy turned to me, trying to keep a straight face, and asked for my ID. I handed it over, along with my property deed that I kept in my garage for situations just like this. Believe it or not, this wasn't Karen's first outburst. After a brief walk around the edge of the lawn and a few muttered ahas, the deputy handed me back my paperwork and said I was within my rights. Karen nearly choked on her coffee. She stormed back to her porch, shouting that this wasn't over, that I'd hear from the legal department, and that she would be escalating this all the way to the city council. Frank nodded solemnly, like they were going to file a declaration with the UN. I figured that was the end of it. But something about the way Karen looked at the edge of her property, like she was unsure for a split second, planted a seed in my mind. What if she was wrong? What if the reason she was so loud, so aggressive, was because she was trying to cover up a mistake she didn't want discovered? I walked back to my shed and pulled out an old dusty file box my grandfather left behind. Inside was a rolled-up map, faded and brittle, from the 1980s. It showed the original property lines before the neighborhood had been subdivided and before the HOA even existed. And that's when I noticed something strange. Karen's house wasn't just near my lot line, it was partially on it. I squinted, lining up the map with the satellite image from my phone, then walked back out to the bush. I stuck a metal rod into the ground where the old boundary post used to be. Then I walked 100 feet west, the exact distance noted on the map, and placed a second rod. That line ran straight through Karen's front porch. My heart started pounding, not out of fear, but out of the cold, calculating thrill of uncovering a truth someone else didn't want found. If I was right, this wasn't about a hedge. This was about a house built partially on land that didn't belong to her. And if that was true, then the real trespasser wasn't me. I took a deep breath, walked back inside, and called a licensed surveyor. It was time to redraw the lines, literally. Karen wanted to play HOA games. Fine. But she didn't realize she'd just challenged someone who plays for keeps. The survey team arrived on a clear Wednesday morning, pulling up in a white pickup with their company logo painted across the door and tripods strapped to the roof. Karen was already outside watering her driveway for reasons unknown to science, wearing oversized sunglasses and a visor like she was prepping for battle at a country club. The moment she saw the crew unloading equipment, she stormed toward them with a righteous fury that could only come from someone both entirely wrong and completely convinced of their moral superiority. One of the surveyors, a tall man named Dave, stepped forward and calmly greeted her. "Morning, ma'am. We're here to conduct a property boundary survey. Just routine, nothing invasive." Karen didn't even let him finish before she threw her garden hose at his boots and shrieked, "This is private property. You can't be here without HOA permission." I stepped out of my garage at that moment, sipping on my coffee and holding the land deed in one hand and a copy of the county's survey request permit in the other. Actually, they're on my land. And I invited them. Karen's jaw dropped. For a few seconds, she looked like a puppet with its strings cut. Then, like a glitching robot, she rebooted into a new form of rage. "This is harassment," she screeched. "You're trying to intimidate me. I'm calling the HOA board right now." She ran inside, leaving behind a trail of wet footprints and the lingering smell of overwatered ego. Dave and his team got to work, carefully mapping coordinates and marking distances using GPS equipment and old survey pins buried in the ground. I stood nearby, silently watching, my arms crossed. Every so often, one of the surveyors would whistle low under their breath or raise an eyebrow as they reviewed the original land plat. What started as a simple confirmation soon turned into something more complicated. I could see them huddling around a set of documents on the tailgate of their truck, pointing at measurements and using a long metal rod to probe the soil for buried boundary markers. After about an hour, Dave walked over, scratching his beard. "You might want to come take a look at this," he said. I followed him back to the truck. There on the paper were several red flags, literally and figuratively. According to the measurements, my property line extended a good 15 feet past the bush Karen had accused me of trimming, cutting diagonally through what she had claimed was her lawn. But that wasn't the shocking part. The real surprise came when Dave continued tracing the line, right through Karen's flower beds, across her porch, and directly into the corner of her actual living room. Her house was sitting on my land. Not by inches, by feet. I had to blink several times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. "How is this even possible?" I asked. Dave shrugged. "Best guess? Bad subdivision records or a faulty build. Could have been overlooked during construction. This happens sometimes in older neighborhoods that were converted into HOA communities after they were built." It made sense, but it still felt unreal. Karen's entire smug existence was about to come crashing down, and she had no idea. I could already hear her voice in my head yelling about her castle and her rights. Except now, she didn't have a legal leg to stand on. As the survey team began placing orange flags into the ground to mark the true boundary, Karen re-emerged from her house like a villain in a soap opera returning from commercial break. She had her phone camera recording this time. "I am documenting this illegal activity," she shouted. "You are all going to jail." She marched right up to one of the flags and yanked it from the soil like she was pulling a sword from stone. "This is my property," she declared. But the flag snapped at the base, and her victory gesture ended with her tripping backward into a flower pot. The camera, still recording, caught the whole thing. I watched as one of the surveyors discreetly smirked. Karen scrambled to her feet, dirt on her knees, still clutching the broken flag like it proved something. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The flag said it all. The red, orange, and white plastic streamers fluttered across her yard like party decorations for a birthday she wasn't invited to. Later that afternoon, Dave handed me the preliminary report, along with a flash drive containing GPS data and photos of every marker they'd found. "You've got a strong case," he said. "This isn't just a boundary error. This is a title issue. Her house is partially on land you legally own. If you push this, you could technically claim part of her structure." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and disbelief. "Thanks, Dave. This might be the beginning of something big." Karen, meanwhile, was pacing her porch like a general surveying a battlefield. She was on speakerphone with someone, I assumed her cousin Frank, ranting about survey fraud, boundary scams, and something about deepfake deeds. I could hear her clearly from where I stood. "He forged everything. I just know it. And I want the HOA legal team to file a motion or lawsuit or injunction, whatever it takes." She paused. "No, I don't care what the survey says. It's my grass." I went back into my house, pulled out the old plat map my grandfather had drawn by hand in 1982, and laid it next to the new GPS report. The two lined up perfectly. There was no mistake. The ground I was standing on, and the land Karen had turned into her own personal fiefdom, belonged to me and had for decades. She just built a house on it like no one would ever question it. It was a surreal realization. All this time, I'd been treating her as an annoyance, a mosquito buzzing near the fence. But now I realized she wasn't just a loud neighbor. She was a squatter, living partly on land she didn't own. And instead of checking her facts, she called the police, the HOA, and filmed videos claiming I was the problem. I knew it was time to take the next step. This wasn't just a petty dispute anymore. This was going to court. I printed out everything. The survey report, historical plat, my deed, and even screenshots of Karen's social media videos. She had posted 3 that day alone, ranting about illegal flag plants and deep state landscapers. They were laughable, but they helped my case more than she knew. I sat down, looked out the window at the flags cutting across her perfect lawn, and smiled. For the first time, Karen's noise wasn't just background chaos. It was the drumbeat of her own unraveling. And the best part? I hadn't even played my best card yet. That would come next, when the law stepped in. The next morning, I found an envelope taped to my front door. It had the HOA's logo printed on the corner and a red, urgent, stamp right over the seal, as if they thought that would make it more intimidating. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I walked out to the edge of my lawn, where the neon orange flags still danced across the grass, marking the awkward truth that Karen's house wasn't just close to the line, it was on the wrong side of it. She was out there too, watering the same spot for the 3rd time that week, as if overhydrating her roses would somehow make the flags disappear. She didn't look up at me, but I could feel the tension clinging to the air like humidity before a storm. When I finally opened the letter, it was every bit as ridiculous as I expected. The HOA claimed that I had willfully disturbed the visual harmony of the neighborhood, engaged in aggressive property surveying, and intimidated fellow residents through hostile markers and psychological landscaping. I read it twice just to make sure it wasn't satire. Then I laughed, because included with the notice was a fine, $500